In 1944, a fighter jet vanished over France without a trace. No wreckage, no parachute. Just a crackle of radio static. And one final word: Miller. For 80 years, the forest said nothing until a faint metal glint beneath the soil pulled the past back into the light. What they uncovered would rewrite everything we thought we knew about that silent sky. Before we descend further into the silence where memories lie buried in twisted metal and names echo through the trees, pause with us. Like this video, and subscribe to the channel. Your support is more than a gesture, it's a marker in the dark, a quiet hand on the shoulder of the forgotten. Every click is a promise that their stories still matter. Every share brings another set of eyes to a truth long hidden. You are the reason we keep digging. Thank you for walking with us into the places history left behind. They say the sky keeps secrets. But sometimes, it also forgets. On a cold April morning in 1944, under a curtain of thin, high clouds, a single-engine fighter vanished above the fields of Saint-Rémy, France. No thunderous crash, no plume of smoke trailing into the horizon, just silence. Deafening, impossible silence. The kind that settles in after something has gone terribly wrong, something the world should have noticed, but somehow didn't. He was flying low, they remembered. Locals recalled a whispering hum that brushed the treetops like a ghost unsure of its path. Some said the sound came from the north. Others insisted it had circled once, dipped, and then was gone. But none had seen it fall. No impact crater, no blackened soil, no torn fuselage groaning in the wind. Only an afterimage, a presence now absent, and the thin thread of static that filled the final seconds of his radio transmission. Miller. That name. It was all the other pilots heard before the signal dissolved into a wall of noise. No mayday, no coordinates, just a crackled utterance, half a plea, half a goodbye, and then nothing. His squadron had been returning from escorting bombers over German-occupied territory. Routine, by war's standards. Predictable. Until he didn't come back. The official report was cold, as most were. Missing in action, presumed downed over enemy territory. No further contact. It read like a sigh, a reluctant filing away of a life. The war moved on, planes were shot down every day. Names slipped through paper and dust like water through the fingers of time. But Saint-Rémy never quite let it go. There were rumors, whispers among the oldest families. A farmer swore he'd found a piece of metal deep in his field that year, marked with English lettering. He buried it again, too afraid, perhaps, of what it meant. Children spoke of dreams where engines screamed through their sleep, then stopped mid-sky. And there was that grove, just outside the village, where nothing seemed to grow quite right. Soil too acidic, or perhaps too haunted. Decades passed, fields were plowed. Generations forgot what their grandfathers only half believed. And still, the sky hung over Saint-Rémy with a quiet that felt heavy, almost deliberate. Like it was holding its breath. They never recovered him. No wreckage was catalogued, no body returned. To the war, he became a statistic. To his family, a wound that never closed. Every year on his birthday, his sister would set a chair for him at the table. She'd place a worn photo next to his empty plate, his face young, smiling, full of the future. And then, she'd say nothing. Because there was nothing left to say. The forest nearby grew dense. Moss blanketed the roots like old secrets, and the air beneath the canopy stayed cool, even in summer. Hikers would sometimes stop, feeling as though they were being watched. Or guided, or warned. The land remembered something the world had chosen to forget. And somewhere beneath that silence, under soil and root and history, a story waited. Untouched, unfinished, almost content in its anonymity. Until, 80 years later, something stirred. A flicker. A glint. The past, rising like a breath held too long. But in 1944, all there was the sky. A name whispered into static. And silence. Always the silence. The wind moved through the woods like a whisper too old to form words. It carried the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else. Something metallic, faint, but unmistakably there. The forest outside St. Remy was dense and mostly ignored, just another stretch of forgotten land nestled between wheat fields and aging stone fences. It hadn't been farmed in decades. The underbrush was thick, littered with moss-covered rocks and branches warped by time. To most, it was nothing more than an overgrown corner of the past. But to the two men moving slowly through the trees, headphones pressed over their ears, it was a map waiting to be read. Julien had been coming here for years. He and his friend Mark had a quiet ritual of walking the woods on weekends with metal detectors slung over their shoulders like hunting rifles. Most days yielded the usual finds: rusted nails, broken belt buckles, bottle caps flattened into anonymity. But that morning felt different. The air was heavy, expectant. And when the detector chirped, not the high-pitched squeal of junk, but the deep, rounded tone of something old, something dense, Julien stopped moving. He dropped to one knee, sweeping the area again, slower this time. The signal held steady. He called for Mark, who came over silently, his breath visible in the cool morning air. They both knelt, digging carefully into the forest floor. The soil was dark and loose, layered with years of pine needles and rain-soaked decay. After a foot, Julien's fingers hit something hard. He brushed it clean with a gloved hand, just a sliver at first, no more than a dull curve of metal peeking through the dirt. But it wasn't a rock. It wasn't natural. It had rivets, hand-set, worn smooth by time but still intact. The color, where any remained, was dulled olive, and when they cleared more around it, they uncovered a piece of aluminum sheeting bent unnaturally inward, as if from an impact. A single flake of red paint clung stubbornly to a corner. Mark leaned in close. "C'est pas civil," he muttered, "not civilian." The forest fell quieter around them, as if the trees had been listening. Julien said nothing. He was staring at something half buried near the edge of the metal. A small, rusted gear, its teeth worn like ancient bones. And beside it, something even stranger: a button. A dull brass button with the faint outline of an eagle clutching arrows. American. Neither man spoke for a long while. The moment didn't ask for voices. It asked for reverence. They didn't know what they had found, not yet. But they both felt it. A shift, as if the ground itself had exhaled. The past was no longer silent. It was murmuring through the soil, through the roots and the rust, trying to rise. Julien stood slowly, his eyes scanning the tree line. He'd walked this land 100 times. And yet, it felt like he was seeing it for the first time. Somewhere beneath them, deeper still, was a story locked in metal and earth. A life lost in the clouds, now beginning to surface. The war had ended 80 years ago, but in this forest, it had never truly left. It had only gone quiet, waiting, until today. In the spring of 1944, the sky above Europe was a canvas of contrails and thunder. Warplanes etched ghostly scars across the heavens, fleeting white lines that vanished into silence almost as quickly as they appeared. Among the hum of engines and the distant thrum of artillery, the 356th Fighter Group carved its place in the clouds. Based in England, their P-51 Mustangs soared eastward each morning, shepherding bomber formations across enemy lines and returning, if fate allowed, before the sun slipped below the hedgerows. They were young, all of them, too young to carry the weight they did, but they wore it like armor, some with bravado, others with the quiet stillness that came just before battle. Among them flew Lieutenant William "Billy" Miller, 23 years old, the son of a mailman from rural Illinois. His mother kept every letter he sent, each one folded neatly and lined with careful handwriting. He wrote about the countryside, the smell of fuel, the way the wings vibrated just before takeoff, He never mentioned fear. Billy had a habit of flying low, skimming treetops when he could, saying it made him feel connected to the world below. Others preferred the cold detachment of altitude, but Billy flirted with the earth like a dancer, always close, always daring. His Mustang was named April's Promise, after a girl he once knew, and a month that seemed long ago. He had painted her name beneath the cockpit in fading cursive. The war had a way of erasing such things. On the morning of April 17th, the squadron's orders were routine escort, a group of B-17 seconds on their run over occupied rail lines in northern France. The mission brief was quick, voices curt and coffee strong. By 0900 hours, the fighters were airborne, sleek silver streaks against the blue. Billy took his usual position to the left of the bombers, a little lower than the rest, eyes sweeping the horizon. There was a rhythm to these missions, quiet at first, then a sudden bloom of chaos when the enemy appeared. But that day, things remained eerily calm. No Messerschmitts, no flak bursts peppering the air. Just miles of rolling French countryside below, towns reduced to specks, fields drawn in neat green grids like a forgotten quilt. Billy's last confirmed sighting placed him just south of Saint-Remy, banking gently, then leveling off. Another pilot swore he saw him adjust his radio, his canopy glinting in the morning Sunday. Then nothing. It happened that fast. One moment he was there, trailing behind the formation, the next he was gone. No smoke, no fireball, no mayday call. Just a ripple in the air and a voice soft, crackling, whispering his own name. Miller. That was all. The word hung in the ether like a breath half held. The rest of the squadron returned in silence. They combed their memories for something they missed, a sound, a flash, a shadow on the ground. But there was nothing. Billy Miller had vanished as if the sky had opened and swallowed him whole. In the days that followed, his bunk remained untouched. His letters home remained unanswered. And in the silence that settled over the base, his absence became a presence, haunting, lingering, permanent. They called them the Ghost Squadron after that. Not officially, not on paper. But among the pilots, among those who knew what it meant to lose someone mid-flight, the name felt right. For Billy had become something more than a man. He had become a story the wind carried, a shadow in the clouds, a name whispered into the static. The morning began like so many others, clear skies above. The horizon stretched endless and sharp, and the engines humming in a symphony of precision and tension. Billy Miller's hands rested steady on the controls of his Mustang, his gloves worn smooth from repetition. The canopy glowed faintly with sunlight, the kind that turned the metal bones of the plane into something alive. Below him, France unfolded in green and brown patches, quiet and deceptively peaceful. To the west, faint trails of smoke lingered where the bombers had already passed. It was supposed to be a simple escort routine, controlled and without surprise. But war never honored routine. Eagle 2, Titan formation, came the voice through the radio, crisp with static. Billy acknowledged, tapping the side of his headset. The signal wavered, crackled, then steadied again. The air was rougher now, crosswinds sweeping down from the north, invisible hands tugging at his wings. He made a slight correction, felt the Mustang resist, then comply. It was small, almost nothing. But in hindsight, every small thing that morning carried weight. At 11:24 hours, the first break in formation occurred. A bomber veered right, trying to avoid cloud cover that had thickened unexpectedly. The escort fighters adjusted, a ripple of motion through the sky. Billy was on the left flank, lower than the others as usual, scanning the ground. He always said he liked to see the earth, it reminded him that it was still there. But from that height, he could also see what others missed. The faint shimmer of water on fields, the glint of rail tracks, the outlines of ruined villages. Somewhere in those ruins, the war breathed quietly. Then came the interference. It started as a hum low, almost imperceptible. the kind of sound you could mistake for your own heartbeat. Then static bled into the channel, cutting across their comms. Voices warped, instructions blurred. One of the pilots cursed softly over the radio before disappearing into white noise. Billy adjusted his dial, tried to reach command. No response. "Eagle 1, this is Miller," he said, voice steady. "Reading you at," the rest dissolved. A rush of static swallowed his words whole. He tried again. Nothing. The air around him seemed to thicken, pressing inward, the kind of stillness that doesn't belong in the sky. It wasn't turbulence. It wasn't gunfire. It was something quieter, heavier. He banked left to regain altitude. His engine sputtered for half a second, a hiccup, not a failure, and when it caught again, the needle on his fuel gauge trembled erratically. He frowned, adjusted, stayed the course. The last anyone saw of him was from Lieutenant Hayes, 2 planes over. Billy's Mustang dipped slightly beneath a thin sheet of cloud, silver wings flashing once in the sunlight. Hayes looked down, expecting him to emerge seconds later on the other side, but he never did. The space remained empty. The radio fell silent. And all that lingered was that brief, broken sound, the one word, barely audible, filtered through static. Miller. That was it. Just his name, as if he had been calling himself back. Then the frequency went dead. For the rest of the mission, the squadron stayed tight. There was no smoke trail, no wreck, no parachute. Nothing to chase. Nothing to mourn properly. Back at the base, they waited. Pilots wrote his name in the log, stared at it like a question that refused to be answered. He wasn't killed. He wasn't found. Just gone, folded into that strange, invisible space between life and legend. Missing. And in war, missing meant something worse than death. It meant eternity in limbo. A story without an ending. A man caught forever in his last turn. The mail still came every Friday, like it always had. Rain, snow, or blistering Illinois heat. Mr. Kramer, the postman, walked his route with boots worn thin and a canvas satchel hanging at his side. He never knocked. He didn't have to. The Miller's mailbox was painted white and tilted slightly to the left, its flag perpetually lowered. On the second week of May, he slid the usual stack of envelopes inside. No letter from Billy. Inside the Miller house, the kitchen ticked with quiet rituals. The kettle on the stove let out a low, lazy whistle. The radio played softly, static humming between piano melodies and war bulletins. And at the table, Ellie Miller sat with her hands folded in her lap, waiting. She was 26, sharp-eyed and steady-voiced, the kind of woman who made herself smaller in a room so others could breathe. She was used to waiting, for war to end, for letters to arrive, for her little brother's name to appear in ink again. The last letter had come 3 weeks earlier. The paper was thin, the words pressed tight and hurried. Billy had written about a patch of wildflowers he'd seen near the airfield and a dog that had adopted the barracks. He signed it the same way he always did. "Keep the porch light on. I'll be home for supper. Billy." She read it 3 times before folding it neatly and slipping it into the box with the others. The box lived in the top drawer of the sideboard, beside the family Bible and their father's old pocket watch. It smelled like cedar and ink and the kind of sadness that grows from repetition. When the telegram came, it arrived in an envelope too thin to contain hope. The man who delivered it didn't meet her eyes. Her mother read it once, then pressed her hand to her chest like something had cracked there. Her father sat in his chair without speaking, staring out the window as if expecting a plane to land on the road outside. "Missing in action," it said. No wreckage, no recovery. Just a blank space where explanation should have been. Ellie didn't cry, not at first. Instead, she began counting days. Not since he vanished, but since his last letter. Every Friday, she still checked the mailbox. Every Sunday, she still set the table for 4 instead of 3. The 4th chair remained untouched, Not out of denial, but because it felt wrong to erase him. Photographs of Billy were everywhere on the mantel, in her wallet, tucked into the mirror in the hallway. His face didn't change, but time around it did. The sunlight bleached the edges, and the ink on the back of one began to fade. She had written Billy April 43 in cursive. Now, only the year remained. Neighbors were kind in the way people are when they don't know what to say. They brought casseroles, they spoke in soft voices. They offered prayers. But none of them could touch the ache that came from not knowing. Death could be grieved, but disappearance was a kind of living wound, a silence that stretched on and on. Some nights, Ellie sat on the porch long after everyone else had gone to bed. The porch light flickering weakly against the dark. She imagined the roar of a Mustang engine, the crunch of boots on gravel, the creak of the front steps. She imagined the screen door swinging open and Billy standing there, grinning, his cap tucked under one arm. She imagined what it would sound like when he said her name. But the night always stayed quiet. The only thing that moved was the wind, and the letters those stopped coming long ago. The wind carried the scent of rain and soil as the excavation team moved in silence, boots sinking into the soft earth of the clearing where Julien and Mark had made their discovery. The forest around Saint Remy watched with quiet indifference, its gnarled branches arching overhead like old bones frozen mid-reach. Beneath a layer of bramble and moss, time had kept its secrets, sealed away in rust and root. But now, the past was rising. It began with a serial number, stamped onto a small, mangled piece of aluminum, barely legible under decades of corrosion. The numbers, once machine-straight and gleaming, were worn, but still there, etched into the skin of a machine that hadn't flown since 1944. Military archives confirmed it within days. The part had belonged to a P-51 Mustang registered to Lieutenant William Harold Miller, 356th Fighter Group. The air around the discovery grew heavier. Not because the mystery was solved, but because it was finally breathing. Archaeologists arrived with their tools and a reverent pace. Shovels gave way to brushes, picks to gloved hands. They moved slowly, removing the soil as if peeling back the layers of a wound that had never properly healed. It was methodical, almost sacred. By the end of the first week, they had uncovered the remnants of a cockpit frame twisted in on itself like a bird with broken wings. The metal curled and flaked in places, but its structure still whispered its shape. One side was scorched faintly, the other dented inward, suggesting impact, not fire. Further down, caught beneath a lattice of roots, they found the remains of a flight jacket. The leather was brittle, eaten by rot and time, but a few buttons clung stubbornly to the fabric. One sleeve had torn away completely. Inside the collar, a faint ink stamp, U.S. Army Air Forces. A chill passed through the group, not from the weather, but from the slow, creeping knowledge that this was no longer a plane. They were beginning to find the man who had flown it. A single boot emerged next, heel cracked and leather split. Mud clung to its shape as if reluctant to let go. The sole bore the faint imprint of its tread, now filled with moss. One of the younger volunteers turned away after seeing it, overcome by the intimacy of the discovery. There was something unbearable in the presence of an object so personal, so final. Then, the moment everyone knew might come, but no one wanted to face. Bone, not fossilized, not distant, human. The fragment was small at first, a curved piece of femur, half shielded by shale. Then more. Ribs, delicate and sun-bleached. Part of a jaw, the teeth surprisingly intact. They stopped digging for a moment, not out of hesitation, but out of respect. The ground had held its silence for 80 years. Now it was giving him back. Forensic analysts would later confirm what no one doubted. The remains matched the age, the height, the timeline. And when compared with the records provided by a distant relative, Ellie's granddaughter, the match was undeniable. Lieutenant William Harold Miller had been found. There was no ceremony, No applause. Just quiet nods, and a long pause before anyone touched the bones. Julian knelt beside the fragments, removing his cap. The others followed suit. Around them, the forest swayed gently, as if exhaling. The heather that blanketed the area had grown thickest over this spot, its purple blooms vibrant against the soil. It had covered him all these years, a blanket of wildflowers growing where the world had forgotten to look. He had never left France. He had never left the sky. But now, finally, someone had come for him. The story hidden in the wreckage did not shout. It murmured. Piece by piece, fragment by fragment, the truth emerged not in the language of machinery or military codes, but in shapes and scars, in the silent tilt of metal and the way the earth had accepted it. The investigators moved like archaeologists of memory, laying each relic out on clean canvas, trying to listen to what it had endured. The cockpit frame told them things the black and white photographs never could. It was crumpled inward, as though something above had pushed down with quiet finality. No evidence of fire, no signs of shrapnel or bullet holes. The bones were unbroken, lying gently, as though Miller had remained in control until the very end. The seat, still partially intact, had not been ejected. No parachute had been deployed. He had not jumped, he had ridden it down. The propeller was bent backwards, not twisted. A detail easily missed, but one that whispered of stillness rather than speed, of an engine that had died in the air. When cross-referenced with the debris field, small, tight, self-contained, it became clearer. The plane had not exploded, had not been torn apart in the sky. It had fallen, slowly, helplessly, like a bird with a broken wing gliding toward the inevitable. Somewhere over St. Remy, something had gone quiet inside the Mustang. Maybe it was fuel starvation. A cracked line, a mechanical seizure, a piece no larger than a coin giving way after too many missions. There was no mayday because there hadn't been time. Or maybe Miller had known the engine was failing, and had chosen not to speak, refusing to call panic into the calm. A young man, alone in the sky, watching the clouds move past him with the slow indifference of fate. The trees had grown up around the impact site, curling their roots around the wreckage like fingers clutched in sleep. The shallow depression in the forest floor was the only evidence of violence, now softened by moss and shadow. If anyone had heard the crash in 1944, they hadn't recognized it for what it was. It must have sounded like a falling branch, a sigh in the woods. There were no witnesses, no enemy fire traced back to that region, no German reports, just the silence. And the way the pieces landed gently clustered, facing one direction, told the story no bullet ever could. He had likely glided as long as he could, guiding the failing plane with both hands, hoping for a clearing, perhaps a field. But the forest had offered no such mercy. It had taken him in without protest, without noise. It was not the death of a soldier in battle, but of a pilot in the lonely arms of the sky. There was no final dogfight, no explosion painted against the clouds, just the hum of an engine that stuttered, the pitch of descent, and the closing of canopy and cloud around him. Experts closed their reports with quiet certainty. They used terms like loss of power, uncontrolled descent, non-combat incident. But those words felt sterile. What remained was something heavier, more human. A man who had not panicked, a man who had not cried out, a man who, faced with the final silence, did not turn away. And in that silence, his story had been buried not in smoke and glory, but in earth and root. In the cruel, soft forgetting of trees, until the ground gave him back. The shovel struck something hard, not rock, not rusted metal. It gave a sharp, hollow sound, the kind that turns a man's breath still in his chest. The volunteer froze. His hands, already numb from hours in the cold soil, moved slowly, parting clumps of earth like pages in a sacred book. Just beneath the surface, half hidden in the roots of a sapling, was a thin piece of metal no larger than a matchbox. Dirt clung to its edges. A corner gleamed dully in the pale light. He brushed it gently, reverently, as if waking something that had been sleeping far too long. It was a dog tag. Bent slightly at the edge, tarnished with time, but still intact. The chain was broken, the links fused with soil and moss. But the tag itself, the tag bore words. Letters stamped in neat, unwavering lines. Letters that hadn't moved in 80 years. Miller. William H. 07-9-134-1. Date 42-43A. P. They read it aloud once, then again. The forest, silent and unmoved, seemed to listen. And then the men just stood there. No one touched it at first. Not out of fear, but out of something deeper. A reverence. A sorrow. His name. After all this time, his name was still here. Etched in steel, not forgotten, not erased. Not lost. Just waiting. Waiting beneath the soil. Beneath the silence. Beneath the weight of decades. William H. Miller. The tag was passed carefully from hand to hand, each person holding it like it might vanish if gripped too tightly. A name, a number, a blood type, a war. A life, reduced to 5 lines and a piece of metal that refused to rust away. There was something holy about it. Something final. Not like finding debris, or fragments of cloth, or bone. Those were parts of a story. This was the name of the storyteller. He had been real, more than a pilot, more than a missing report filed in a dusty folder. He had lived, and now he had been found. The air seemed heavier in the clearing. Time slowed. Someone knelt. Another man wept. Not loudly. Just a single breath catching in his throat and not letting go. The others looked away, not out of shame, but out of respect. It was not grief alone. It was the weight of knowing that a man who had vanished without goodbye had finally been allowed to say something. I was here. The tag was placed in a small evidence bag, labeled with shaking hands. Photographs were taken, coordinates logged. But it was the act of looking, of seeing that name with their own eyes, that marked the true moment. Everything before had been mystery, pieces, shadows. Now it was real. Miller. They whispered it like a prayer. Like the closing of a book that had remained open too long. There were no trumpets, no planes overhead. Just the quiet sound of wind moving through trees, and the soft echo of history. Breathing once more through the name of a man who never came home. Until now. The sky above St. Remy was bright that morning, washed in a soft blue that seemed too gentle to have ever known war. A breeze moved low over the fields, bending the tall grass in slow, sweeping gestures. The forest edge, once thick with silence, now stood like a witness, solemn, unmoving, ancient. At its heart, the earth had yielded its secret, and now the world had come to listen. They laid him to rest with the full honors of a soldier who had never been forgotten, only misplaced by time. An American flag, crisp and precise, was folded in silence. The casket, draped in red, white, and blue, sat beneath a simple canopy beside a stone cross, newly carved with his name. Lieutenant William Harold Miller, 1921 to 1944. The chaplain's voice was low, trembling not from fear but from reverence. His words floated upward, swallowed by the wind. In the front row sat Ellie's granddaughter, a silver chain around her neck, her hand gripping a folded letter worn at the creases. Behind her, a handful of villagers from St. Remy, farmers and schoolteachers. Some old enough to remember the war, others too young to know it firsthand, but drawn by something they couldn't quite name. Among them stood Julian and Mark, their eyes fixed on the coffin as if still not fully believing what their hands had unearthed. It wasn't the kind of funeral found in movies. No booming salutes, no sweeping orchestral score. It was quieter, more honest. A trumpet played taps, its melody soft and unhurried, curling through the air like a bird rising and vanishing into the light. And as the notes faded, the clouds rolled slowly above, just as they had on the day Billy disappeared. But this time, the sky did not keep him. Back in the village, someone had pinned his photograph to the bulletin board outside the Mary. The same face, the same grin, the same slanted pilot cap that Ellie had framed all those years ago. A bouquet of wild heather lay beneath it. No card, just the flowers. A small plaque now marks the edge of the woods where they found him. It bears no grand statement, only his name and the date he was lost. People pause there sometimes, not for long. Just long enough to feel the hush settle in their bones, the kind that isn't absence but remembrance. The field, once unmarked and overgrown, has started to change. The soil seems softer now, the wind a little warmer. Birds nest in the branches overhead. Children wander its edge with wide eyes and whispered voices. They don't know exactly what happened here, but they feel it, they always do. And the sky, endlessly wide, endlessly watching, seems to know too. Not just what was lost, but what was finally returned. Some stories don't disappear, they wait to be found. Buried in silence, held in shadow. And when the moment is right, when the earth is ready, they rise, gently, like wings catching air. And they remind us that memory is not gone, it only sleeps.